Hello friends, so as some of you know, August happens to be Women in Translation Month, so I thought in today's video I would share with you some of my favorite female written books over the past year. And as chance would have it, all of them happen to be translated works. Maybe that means I need some recommendations on female works in English, my native tongue, but regardless, I want to share with you these books because all of them are fantastic and well worth your time. First is Voracious by Małgorzata Libda. And before I talk about the book, I need to share a few words about the publisher Linden Editions because this is only one of two books from them I'm going to mention in this video. They are a very tiny publisher, a new publisher. I think they started like 2 years ago, based in the UK, and are solely dedicated to works in translation, about bringing lesser known works into the Anglosphere, into that sphere of awareness. And this is another example of that. So Voracious is a Polish novel and follows a narrator who is grappling with and assisting her mother Roja as she grapples with terminal illness. And so the work largely fixates around these different reflections or conversations and memories between her and her grandmother, or her grandmother's behavior, particularly how she has such a boundless love for nature and all of creation. The little insects in her room, the plants and trees surrounding their home and in the garden and things like that. And so you'll see that the novel, although it kind of has this general, let's say, surface level coding of sorrow and grief and mourning, and there's plenty of that, I actually found it to be an uplifting and hopeful novel, despite all of those kind of darker themes or realities that are connected to terminal illness. And so it really becomes, I think, a powerful and insightful reflective novel on illness, on mourning, and really highlights the preciousness of life. How despite its fragility and its temporality, its impermanence, life still remains, both in human form, our loved ones, but also, you know, the natural world around us. There is something so precious about it. The splendors of existence, if I'm to speak more pretentiously. Like, there's just, it's a very contemplative, I think, novel. And although it didn't blow me away, I did find it to be quite capable of evoking a fairly wide range of emotions, of love, of sadness, of tenderness, of sentimentality, all of that within this book. So I think especially if you are a more sentimental reader, if you are grappling with terminal illness yourself, or you know someone in your family or friends that are dealing and suffering from terminal illness, I think it will probably hit home that much more. So a very kind of thoughtful novel that I recommend. Next, in a similar but different vein, is Three Apples Fell from the Sky by Abgaryan. And this novel also deals with illness and with tragedy and suffering, but in a very different way and has very different takeaways. So this novel unfolds along the mountains of Armenia, in a tiny little village. And it really splits off into three separate narratives that are interconnected and intertwined kind of on and off throughout the work. You open with this woman, Anatolia. I think she's in her 50s if I remember correctly, so this middle-aged woman, and she is bleeding from her womb. One may think that it's related to menopause. She tends to think that she is days away from dying and starts to kind of distance herself from her, you know, her neighbors, her friends that come and check on her all the time. She's childless, she's without husband or any immediate family. But in that first part, because this is split into three parts, which are based on this Armenian proverb that opens the work, and within those reflections, we learn about her past, we learn about her mother. I think it's her mother's kind of golden hair that is just almost has this like magical quality to it. And or like, you know, fairy tale type quality to it. And so we're gathering this information specifically about her and her lineage, but also about the village more broadly. Then we get into the second part, which brings in this younger couple. I believe it's the son of one of the villagers who has returned with a wife from the city, and they initially have a more kind of negative feeling towards her, like, here comes the city girl into the village. She doesn't know how to get her hands dirty. And she's inversely a little bit more standoffish as well towards them, but quickly she is able to immerse herself in the village, in the culture, the traditions, the ways of these people, and they likewise in turn welcome her graciously, get her involved in the fields and tending the land and all of that. And she herself is also still breastfeeding with a child. So there's a lot of elements of motherhood, of feminine energy and womanhood that gets woven into the novel and their characters. And then we get to the third part of the work, which starts to blend everything together, and you start to see how the community, despite all the tragedies that befall them, whether it's war, whether it's illness and plagues that start to knock down their population meaningfully, their husbands, sons, fathers head off to war, and you start to see the village slowly dwindle in size and even in youth. And so by the end of the novel, though, you see it really highlights the importance of community. It reflects this replenishment of the village. And overall, the theme of interconnectivity, dependence upon one another, community, to put it in one word, is the thread that runs throughout the work from beginning to end. And it just begins to grow and swell and become increasingly apparent by the end of the work exactly what Abgaryan is trying to express through the novel. But especially as it pertains to Women in Translation Month, I found the female characters to be so strong, and they just reflect such resilience, wisdom, and tenderness. And so it's a very charming novel. It very much reads like a parable. And so for that reason, I think it's a very kind of casual and lighthearted, I think at the end of the day, kind of book, despite some of the moments of tragedy or sadness. For better or for worse, we're continuing with some darker themes with Sofia Petrovna by Lydia Chukovskaya. Now, this is a very, very slim book. You could probably read it in a day, a few days, and it centers around the eponymous Sofia Petrovna, who really becomes this every woman within Soviet culture. It takes place within the 1930s, which, if you know anything about Soviet history, you know that this is one of the darker eras and decades in recent Russian history, and particularly during Stalin's purges of the late 30s. And that's the nightmarish whirlwind that our character finds herself in. Initially, the first maybe 30% of the book, you're getting a feel for Sofia Petrovna. She is a widow. She has a nice son. I think his name is Kostya, so Konstantin. And he, just like her, they're both fervent believers in socialism and in Bolshevism and all the ideologies of Lenin. But all of a sudden, she starts to witness a sharp and abrupt rise and egregious accusations and a sudden arrest of not just people within her, vague outer circle, but in her immediate circle, at her workplace, her boss, her friends, and then eventually her own family. And without spoiling the book, I think what the novel more than anything expresses is that under an authoritarian regime, no one is safe or protected from such errant violence and oppression. It's easy to think, oh, well, they're just going after the guilty ones. Well, clearly, if they're arrested, there was some cause for them to be arrested. There was some reason. They must have done something wrong. But as you read the novel, which is a very familiar account for Soviet citizens of this time, you start to recognize, no, arrests and executions are not always justified with evidence or rationality, despite the ideology that fueled the revolution. And boundless power in the hands of monstrous and authoritarian forces is a recipe for not just disaster, but the greatest human casualty. And so this book, I really think people should read it in two senses. Of course, it's a recollection, a kind of insight into the terror of the time, but it's also a warning of what's been repeated throughout history in nations beyond the USSR and times beyond the 30s, and even today. All right, let's break the tension with something a little bit more lighthearted, and that would be The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Agawa. Agawa was a woman, a Japanese writer I've been trying to read for a while now, and I cracked into this last fall, and really, I just thoroughly enjoyed it. It's a very light, delicate read. It's very heartwarming, and it follows a woman who becomes basically the like eighth, 11th, the latest housekeeper hired for this retired mathematician, this retired professor, who suffers from brain damage that makes his memory reset every 8 minutes. So when she meets him, he's got these sticky notes everywhere that basically remind him who he is, what he's supposed to be doing, who is this lady showing up to his house. And so it becomes a very interesting novel the more as the novel unfolds, because Agawa manages to carefully weave in mathematic formulas and theories and Japanese baseball, and specifically the housekeeper's son becomes this very affable character that becomes central to the novel. And I think all in all, what it really highlighted for me was the awareness that we are capable of having towards trivial moments, or the kind of nuances of our day-to-day. It's kind of another one of these novels that reminds us to turn our attention to our immediate awareness, to the little joys of each day. And for that, it was heartwarming. Next is one of my favorite novels from last year, and that is In Late Summer by Magdalena Blažević. This novel nearly won, I forgot exactly what award it was nominated for, but it just got beat out by some novel, I think by something Ali Griff, published by Penguin House, so it probably had a lot more promotion behind it. But this is a delightful book, just a emotionally ravaging, but also lyrically poignant and hard-hitting book. It's very much written with poetic prose. It follows these vignettes through the eyes of a 14-year-old girl in a Bosnian village, and it captures the horror of war. About half of the novel, maybe a little bit more, is mainly these whimsical and dreamlike depictions of her village, of her childhood. Everything is warm and light. There's a kindness and tenderness and nostalgia to it all. The sweetness of the cherries and the strawberries, the vibrant colors, the light, just the childish games they're playing. It just fills you with nostalgia and pleasant feelings and memories. But then there's a sharp twist and a contrast that becomes so strong and pointed within this novel when, army boots and soldiers start to arrive in the village, and it becomes ravaged, and the vibrant red juices of strawberries turn into viscous blood, and everything just is turned on its head. And I think it really captures the innocence of childhood, the innocence of victims, and the atrocities that are wars. And I still plan to read a lot more about not just the Bosnian War, but all the wars within the Balkans, specifically within the 90s or late 80s, I guess, rolling into the 90s, because there's just so much there, unfortunately, so many atrocities there and suffering. But it's stuff that's still obviously, those generations that suffered those losses and those horrors are still alive today, and writing books like this. I was inspired, as far as I know, from her own kind of experiences. Yeah, just a beautiful, beautiful work. Really surprised me. The writing in here is just moving. And yeah, can't recommend it enough. I have a written review of this on my Substack and website, and I've made, a lot of posts about it in the past here on the channel and on my Instagram, so you should read it. Next up is The Disappearing Act by Maria Stepanova. Now, I must admit, I didn't love this novel. It's not bad by any means, but I found it to have certain flaws, which I'll get to in a moment. But this follows a writer known as M, who is fleeing an unnamed country. It's Russia, and she is fleeing that country because it is at war with a neighboring country, Ukraine. And the novel becomes largely a reflective piece on one's assumed and absorbed guilt by virtue of nationality or ethnicity or language. I'll circle back to that in a moment. But it also becomes this kind of travel log where again, the writer M meets this one man along her travels as she's traveling western to go towards this writing festival or event. And it's a very, again, slim book, short book. Stepanova largely writes poems, so the book largely has this kind of poetic and symbolic sense to it. Doesn't kind of beat around the bush or have a lot of wasted breath. However, where I found the novel to be quite weak is that it makes fine, fair, justified, and moral criticisms of current events that unfortunately are still going on. However, the reason I have reserve with it, the reason I have issue with it, is because of the association it makes of guilt, shame, horror, atrocities with entire ethnic groups or with entire language, the language itself. It generalizes far too much and carries this very sententious tone and attitude towards it all that I sometimes come across very much with emigre writing and literature, and understandably so. And again, it doesn't make the argument inherently wrong at all. However, I think when a writer wants to approach such a heavy and painful subject, they need to be precise. They need to be more careful than assigning blame to an entire group purely because they happen to be born in a certain country. In my review of this, I compared it to, casting blame upon all Spanish people for the Inquisition, or casting blame on all Americans for, we could say, the bombing of Iraq or Afghanistan or certain, campaigns that the U.S. does. And in this instance, I'll just approach it directly. It would be the same as blaming all Russians for the attacks and the war waged by the Russian government. And that's just not fair. It's not fair, it's not accurate, and it's also, even more so, it's not fair to do it to the language itself. The language itself is a tool. It's a medium for expressing ideas, for carrying out communication, for all sorts of things that language does. However, it is simply a tool. It's like blaming the hammer for the murder. The hammer is a tool, and the tool itself is not directly designed to commit violence, right? So language itself should not be treated as, the monster's breath or the monster's, the words that the monster speaks. I forgot exactly how she words it in this book. So I don't mean to harp on that for too long, but I wanted to kind of, I guess, summarize why I had a pause with this book. That said, if you are looking for a very fairly short and reflective book, I give it a read. Next is probably the hardest book, the most challenging, disorienting of these that I mentioned this, and that is The Passion According to GH by Clarice Lispector. Love, love, love Clarice Lispector. Her writing is so epigrammatic, it's so loaded, and that's why almost all of her books are fairly short. This one I think is just under 200 pages, 183, and it, on a plot basis or on a plot level, it just follows an artist, a sculptor, a Brazilian sculptor who comes home and ends up killing a cockroach with a door, and it becomes this kind of reflective piece on the murder she just committed and the life she took. But it becomes more a fixation on identity, on temporality, on death, on all sorts of things. And just on a prose level, I loved it. It's just so symbolic, so rich. And Lispector just has a way of just maintaining your attention at all times. And yeah, her work is just simply beautiful. When you think of beautiful writing, you think of Clarice Lispector. So I still don't know why I drag my feet getting more of her books, but maybe I'm just taking my time. Maybe I'm just spreading it out so I don't read everything of hers. But I definitely need to keep it up with reading more Lispector. Can't recommend this enough. And lastly is a new release, upcoming release, should be published in 2 weeks, and that is Anya Danye's The Song of the Stork and Dromedary. This book is interesting. It wasn't to my liking. That said, that's more of a personal taste and interest than the book itself. The book itself is quite complex and layered, and it still has those puzzle, riddle-like components and the thrilling elements that made me want to read the book in the first place, because last year I read The Remembered Soldier by Anya Danye, and that also just kept me in suspense until the last few pages. And this book largely does a lot of that well too. But this will be an absolute delight for those of you that are readers of the Brontes. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing that wrong, but you know, Jane Bronte, Charlotte, and is the third one Anne? Forgive me, I think it's Anne. And I say that because the characters of this novel are pretty much stand-ins for the Bronte sisters, their childhoods, their ideas, their illnesses, all of that. It's very much inspired from their lives. But the novel here centers around Eliza May Drayden, who is one of many sisters, the Drayden sisters, and she has also written, like Emily Bronte, which is who she's resembling here, has also written a Gothic Victorian novel, which also received a lot of heavy criticism at the time, but became this kind of enigmatic and emotionally, psychologically innovative novel. And beyond that, the work is broken up into 11 main profiles, or kind of mini bios that you're reading of these characters. And then interspersed within those are other kind of mini accounts, notes, diary entries, quotes from supposed critics or biographies of these fictional characters. So all these meta-narratives are going on here. It's kind of hard to track sometimes, especially when you have multiple characters named Emery, for example. It's just a lot of characters to keep up with, to be honest. Perhaps too many, which I'll get to in a moment. Especially because the story stretches over nearly 300 years. You start in the late 18th century, and the last character I think dies in like 2030. So again, you're dealing with this massive, expansive timeline. The novel is sweeping, and largely it's bloated. That's my primary criticism with this work, besides my own kind of personal interest, or lack of interest, I should say, is it's too bloated. I think her writing is very silky. It's smooth. It flows very smooth. It's not quite poetic, I would say. There's not many of those, you know, quotes that just floor you, anything like that. But I think overall her characters do possess a lot of sentimentality and emotion, and there's a lot of drama that is carried through each of her scenes, even as she's switching through different timelines or characters. And as you're slowly kind of putting the pieces together, things do start to build. However, she gets carried away at times. She spends 12 pages talking about something or describing a scene that should only take 2 pages. And for that, you know, you end up getting like this larger chunker than it needs to be. That said, some of you will love it. Some of you will love it for sure, especially if you are fans of Victorian literature. If you've read the Brontes, like I said, then I think you'll feel right at home. You'll start to see even more parallels and such than I did. But yeah, Anya Danye, this will come out, I think, in about 2 weeks, and I should have a published review posted here soon as well. So that is it. That is all I have for you today. 8 works, all in translation, from some incredible female authors. Let me know in the comment section down below, what is a female work or author that comes to mind after all this? A favorite translated work, especially since we are still here in August. Let me know in the comments, like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe for more content, and I will see you all in the next one.